We're now going to move on to our next session, which is our first panel discussion of the day, which will explore barriers to diverse leadership. So please welcome Professor Crystal Donnelly and the speakers for this session to the stage, Professor Tom Welton, Dr. Amanda Aldicott, Professor Leslie Eloise, and Professor Carol Mundell. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We got off to a great start with being inspired by our first speaker, and now we're going to have a panel session. So the format of this will be, I will introduce our speakers. We have Professor Tom Welton, who's a Dean of the Faculty of Natural Sciences at Imperial College, and so he will be our first speaker. We have Amanda Aldicott, who's the Head of Knowledge and Research at Advance HE, and she will be a second speaker. We have Professor Leslie Eloise, who was recently at the University of Edinburgh. And finally, from the Department of Physics in Bath, Professor Carol Mundell. So the format of this is we're going to have 4 10-minute talks. If you can join with me in waiting until the end to thank all of them with a round of applause, then we can get through them one after the other. And also, make notes of your questions, so we'll deal with all the questions at the end. So we'll give all 4 speakers the opportunity to speak, and then we'll have questions at the end. We have plenty of time for that. And so the topic of this, the aim of this session, is to explore the obstacles to diverse leadership in the research environment specifically, but perhaps we'll address that more generally as well, and then to look at ways that we can overcome these obstacles. So what are strategies or approaches that we can take that will help us? So without further ado, I will hand over to Tom.
Thank you. And thank you for the invitation to come today. So let me start with Tom Welton. I've heard this about me. Tom Welton, you know, the one from Imperial College. Good with people. A more damning insult to somebody who aspires to be recognised for scientific excellence, I can't imagine. At its very best, it's a complete irrelevance. But actually, most of the time, it's an insult. Now, that's in spite of the fact that, you know, I am a leader in science. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Natural Sciences at Imperial College. That's a pretty senior position. But I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago in Lisbon, very nice, talking to a very dear friend of mine, an Australian woman professor, who was asking me, not for the first time, why I wasted my talents on institutional management when I could be focusing so much more on my research. So we have to accept that, you know, around the Provost Board at Imperial College, we call ourselves the leadership team. But I think that there is a simple truth that to the scientific community in general, mere institutional managers are not considered to be leaders. So who is? So when I was first, well, actually not when I was first head of Department of Chemistry, a year after I'd been head of Department of Chemistry, I went to HR and said, don't you think it's about time I had a bit of training for this role? And I ended up going to a course at the London School of Economics, where, very importantly, I was the only academic in the room. The other attendees at the course were from industry, banking, from civil service, around the world, but not academics. And one of the tasks that we'd been asked to perform before we arrived at this course, you know, alongside the Myers-Briggs and those kind of things, was another form of test where we were asked to answer either A or B. Would I change my job for reason A or reason B? And then you went down this list. You had to pick one. You know, and the A's and B's seemed to be ridiculous to me. They were, you know, practically, would you rather stab your mother or shoot your father? You know, and I couldn't see what this had to do with me particularly. So I did it conscientiously. I did the task, and of course, when it got reported back to us in the room, and there was probably about as many people in the room as there are here, it was reported back publicly, and what that test was about was what our drivers were. And I sat there, and they looked at, you know, whether, you know, you were driven by money. I was the least driven by money person in the room. Whether you were driven by power, I was the least driven by power in the room. I was feeling quite smug at this stage. And of course didn't realise that something was about to come. And I was massively the most driven in the room by perceptions of status. Oops. But, you know, so, I mean, not only was I a little bit surprised by this awful character flaw that I had, but I consider myself someone that knows themselves very well. And I was like, how did I not realise that I had this terrible character flaw? And then, of course, I went back to work. And at Imperial College, I was thinking, perceptions of status. Rankings, H-index, prizes, awards, fellowships. At Imperial College, as an academic, I wasn't extreme in any way. In fact, if anything, I was extreme the other way. Our whole way of working and understanding the world is riddled with perceptions of status. Now, this is, of course, about diverse leadership. Well, how do you get diverse leadership? We've already heard, we've been told very clearly, you get diverse leadership by having inclusive leadership. That is how you do it. And when we ask people what they want in their leaders, they want inspirational role models, they want supportive, attentive mentors, they want enthusiastic champions, they want people that include them in the processes that influence their lives. In other words, good with people. Yet, we do not prize it. I've been asked to point out, you know, something that might be a problem, which I have just done. The problem is in the things that we, as the gatekeeper, and I include, I'm a member of the Council of the RSC, we give God knows how many prizes out. We've even instigated prizes for diversity and inclusion. But people do know they're not quite the same as the other prizes. And so do you, or you wouldn't be sniggering. If we want to have a change in culture, here's the solution. If we want to have a change in culture, and if we want ourselves to be led by people who are good with people, we need to change our concept of scientific excellence. Why is it when and I have received prizes, why is it when I've received prizes, I have received them for how good I am with a round-bottom flask and not how good I am with people? When in spite of that, all of the research that I've done in my life has been done with other people, whether it be collaborators, whether it be students, whether it be postdocs, all of the science that I've ever done has been done with people. If we want to make a change, if we want to have more inclusive leadership, what we have to do is define leadership as being inclusive. And we have to prize it. We have to put it not into a special box of here's our diversity inclusive leadership prize. We have to say, in order to be recognised as scientifically excellent, in order to be recognised as a scientific leader, you have to have these qualities which go beyond how good you are with a round-bottom flask. If it is not within the criteria for prizes, awards, and here we are at the Royal Society, in the criteria for fellowships, We will not change things because we will not be prizing the thing that we want. So there you go, my call to the Royal Society. My call to the Royal Society of Chemistry has been for some time. We need to change the criteria of scientific excellence to include good with people. Thank you very much.
Oh, okay, yes, sure.
Hello. I'm going to do things slightly differently because I have a presentation of slides to use. So my name is Amanda Aldercott. I am the Head of Knowledge and Research at Advance HE. Advance HE is a newly formed organization that used to be the Equality Challenge Unit, Leadership Foundation for Higher Education, and the Higher Education Academy. I'm here to talk to you today about some of the more recent research we've done into the gender pay gap in higher education, and particularly the explanations for these pay gaps and the actions that institutions have in place to mitigate the gap. So in the last year, the academic gap, the gap between men and women's salaries on average was 17.2%. That represents a 1.8 percentage drop over the last 5 years. So we're showing progress, slow, gradual, but progress nonetheless. This might be to the number of initiatives that exist and the raised awareness around gender equality, but the 17.2% that still remains tells us that we have a lot of room for improvement. So in an effort to try and help figure out where to go next and how to maintain this progress and how to keep this momentum going, we decided to try and address two research questions with regards to the pay gaps within higher education institutions specifically. First, what are institutions saying are the reasons underpinning their gap? And second, what are institutions doing to try and mitigate that gap? And is there something that, are there actions that we can look into more closely and evaluate more thoroughly? In 2017, the UK government made it legally obligatory for institutions with more than 250 employees to make their gender pay gap figures publicly available. They also recommended including a narrative alongside these, and this is where we decided to search for the answers to these two research questions. Because only English institutions were actually legally obliged, we included English higher education institutions in this sample only. Out of the 132 English higher education institutions in England, 122 of them submitted a narrative. And we broke these narratives down into sections on their explanations and sections on their actions. So the most frequently reported explanations. First, I thought it would be interesting to just actually point out that of the 122 institutions that provided a narrative, only about 4 out of 5 of them actually talked about their own context. The fifth ones tended to talk about just sort of historic reasons for a gender pay gap or why there's a pay gap in general, rather than actually saying, this is why we have one in our institution. Of those that did mention reasons, we did a qualitative analysis of them, in that we read through them and added labels for those explanations that kept coming up over and over and over again. And even though we only had 122 narratives, we came up with 48 different reasons. These reasons tended to center around particularly occupational segregation. So especially thinking about the different levels of seniority within the institution and the overrepresentation of men in senior roles and in higher paying salary bands. This was present in 4 out of the 5 narratives that were made public. The next one down, and you can see that it's such a big difference, only 1 out of 6 instead of 4 out of 5 said that they had an overrepresentation of women in sort of casual, manual, and student employee positions. So as administrators, as student ambassadors, cleaners, those kinds of roles. Finally, 1 out of 10 said that there was an overrepresentation of female staff in part-time roles. So these are the 3 most frequently, but as I said, there was 48 different reasons listed. With regards to the actions to mitigate the gender pay gap, we did a similar approach. Of the 122 narratives that we had access to, 86 of them mentioned an action that they had in place. Most of them mentioned more than one action. Across the 86 narratives, we came up with a list of 88 initiatives that were mentioned. So obviously, places tended to have more than one going at a single time. They weren't just trying to try one thing and have this fix the problem. But the they tended to center around specific themes. So these are the three main themes that came out, but we also had other themes like family-friendly policies, advertising and how you do your recruitments through advertisements and things like that. But when we looked at the individual codes for the general themes that were coming out of the narratives, flexible working and sending people on the Aurora leadership training program were the ones that tended to come out the most frequently. However, I think it's important to note that about a quarter of them were talking about unconscious bias training as well, and particularly around unconscious bias training for panelists, so people involved in promotion and recruitment, as well as having it as part of the staff induction process. So everybody coming into an organization was receiving this kind of training. Unconscious bias training is where you learn about perhaps biases in your own interpretations and assumptions, and are given some tools and helped with trying to correct these behaviors. So the two take-home messages that I wanted to kind of highlight for you today was, while occupational segregation and the overrepresentation of men in senior posts was the major explanation, the most common explanation that higher education institutions tended to give, there were quite a lot of factors that were brought up. So this reflects, or echoes other research that we have done on the individual level. So when I first started for Advance HE, I was working on a survey of STEM academics, and the barriers that STEM academics discussed in this survey tended to be similar to the barriers that were coming up in these narratives as well. So they did mention the lack of representation of women in senior roles in their positions. They did mention things like caring responsibilities and lack of flexible working options as being barriers for them on the individual level as well. And it also reflects other research that has been done beyond the higher education context to also include like the private and public sector, reflecting similar sort of dimensions coming in to kind of all explain and reinforce the gap by being interactive and having an effect on each other once and an ongoing process. The second take-home message is that this variety or diversity of explanations means that we need to take a diverse approach to answering or trying to address this gap. If there isn't just one cause, we can't just have one solution. And this was shown and demonstrated in the narratives themselves, with there being 88 different types of actions that institutions were mentioning already. While the narratives didn't include any kind of evidence of impact or sort of say how these actions might be improving their gender pay gap, other research that we have done at Advance HE using the Athena Swan Award applications have helped uncover examples of most frequently occurring recruitment and promotion techniques that help improve and have a positive impact on actually attracting strong female women to posts. So in these kinds of situations where we went through the Athena Swan applications, we picked out ones that had demonstrated a positive impact the most frequently, and those included things like unconscious bias training and flexible working options. I've put together a list of resources in case anybody would be interested in them afterwards, and just wanted to say thank you very much.
I'm waiting while somebody else does all the technology. Great. So thank you, and thank you for the invitation. It's been wonderful hearing everybody to date. And I'm reassured that there's a lot of common messages coming through, which I think is helpful to help us progress. So just to briefly introduce myself, I'm Leslie Elleys. I'm at the moment chairing the Royal Society of Edinburgh Tapping All Our Talents 2018 report, which is about the progression or lack of progression in women in STEM. And we are about to launch that report on the 12th of November. So little do they know I'm here actually highlighting some of it before, but don't tell them. I think it's interesting, though, talking about leadership. I just got a text message in saying, Leslie, we've got it back from the report back from the whoever it goes to, the designer, and it's now called Tapping All Our Talents 6 Years On. And I just sent a text at the back there saying, okay, if that's what that's what you've decided, fine. Just note that in everything that I'm speaking about it in, I'm calling it Tapping All Our Talents 2018. So as I was sitting there, I got another text coming going, okay, Leslie, we've changed it back to Tapping All Our Talents 2018. So never underestimate what you can do simply by sending a text. I was Vice Principal and Head of Science and Engineering at Edinburgh until last year, and I was President of the Royal Society of Chemistry from 2012 to 14, being their first female president in their 175-year history. So what I was asked to speak about was career progression, which automatically talks about promotion, and finally leadership. So let me talk about progression. First of all, that means we need a bit of data here. So I'm taking it from Tapping All Our Talents, which was published in 2014. And some of the key findings from that were that 73% of women graduates were lost from STEM compared to 48% of male graduates. That is, when they graduate, only 27% of females who have a STEM degree will carry on into some sort of STEM job after that. It's estimated that a doubling of the women's high-level skill contribution to the economy would be worth as much as £170 million per annum to Scotland's national income. And finally, the leaky pipeline diagram, which shows that in every subject of STEM, and you can see 6 of them then, that's biology, chemistry, mathematics, computing, physics, and engineering, all of them have a leaky pipeline. In other words, they have a negative slope going from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. That is from what the subjects they take up at school level through to being a professor at the other end. All of them, all science subjects have a leaky pipeline. And excuse me, I'll use science when I really mean STEM. So that was the 2008 data. What about the 2017 data that we will publish in 2 weeks' time? Well, you can see there that we still have a leaky pipeline. It has got better. So let's admit that things have got slightly better if you look at the top end, the professor end level. So chemistry, my own subject. In 2012, 5% of professors were female. In 2017, it's between 9 and 10%. But note that that only means 45 people. And note that in chemistry and in biology, being the most dramatic ones, the slope has in fact got worse between 2008 and 2017. Why? And that is not the kind of picture you want to see. And what can we do to get over that? As Jackie mentioned, of course, this isn't peculiar to STEM. And here's a similar graph done for many of the arts and humanities subjects. And again, you will see the last 2 points in the graph, which are lecturers and readers going to professors. There is that negative slope. The leaky pipeline exists. In other words, it is not unique to STEM that people do not take up leadership positions, that do not go for promotion, that do not go to professor. So why do we lose? What is this progression issue? Well, many leave. We've already seen that from the statistic. Many don't get promoted. There is a lack of promotion. And many don't want promotion. I lose track of the number of women that I saw when I was head of science and engineering at Edinburgh, when I said, come on, put your name forward for promotion. No, 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 I don't want promotion. I want to stay where I am. I never, ever had that conversation with a man. And let me say that waiting it out is not an option. We can tell that from biology. Biology for years have had a great pipeline in. And for over 50 years, they've been waiting for that pipeline to kick in and that they will end up with a good percentage of female leaders. That hasn't happened. So we can't wait it out. That isn't an option. Some reasons for people leaving academia, all familiar to you. Long working hours, and unfortunately long working hours is associated with, if I want to get promoted, I've got to put in the hours, people have got to see me do that. Why? I think things like this have to be challenged. A lack of support, you've talked very nicely about unconscious or systemic bias. The macho culture is alive and well, let's be honest. There's a huge lack of family-considerate conditions. And we need to be much more vocal about it, and we need to just speak about it much more. There are inflexible structures, both in terms of getting research grants and also in terms of the jobs. And isolation. A lot of people you speak to feel very isolated, particularly women. So let's talk about promotion. The criteria and the process must be transparent. People must know what it is they're applying for and how they're going to get that promotion. What is important? What should I put down on the forms? What are people going to sit up and take notice of? Individual circumstances must be fully recognised. So everybody is different. We're all unique. And we all have a unique set of circumstances and a unique history. And they should all be fully recognised. All contributions must be valued, and parity between research, teaching and leadership understood at all levels. That's coming back to Tom's point. And of course, universities can do that. They can shift the criteria wherever they want. And by doing so, they can change the paperwork. The problem is, there's two main problems in my opinion. One is that the people applying for promotion don't always believe that the university has changed. So don't always believe that their leadership qualities or their teaching or whatever else they're giving to the university as a whole are being understood and recognised. So people have to be told, and people have to listen, and people have to understand, and then they have to witness it happening. And the other problem we have with that is referees. All promotions ask for referees. And referees tend on the whole to be senior academics that the person who's applying for promotion wants them to support. And quite rightly too, why wouldn't you? The problem is that many referees do not bother to read the paperwork that comes in. And so they write a reference based on what they experienced and what they know. And I lost track of the number of referees' comments that I had when I was head of science and engineering at Edinburgh, where I had to say, I don't think this referee understands what our criteria are. So we need to do a sales job there, and we need people to understand that things have changed and that promotion is very different now. People don't want promotion, some because of imposter syndrome. I shouldn't be here, I'm not good enough. Some are content with their current role. Work-life balance is important for people, and that should be recognised far more. And if work-life balance, if you've got a life outside of your work and by working long hours is going to interrupt that, then shame on us for not promoting and making accommodations. There is a lack of positive role models and stress. There's a lot of stress, and people don't want what they perceive to be additional stress if they get promoted. So why would you take up a leadership role? People talk about leadership. We've had lovely conversations about leadership. Why would you take it up? Why did I take up leadership roles? I took leadership roles up, one, because they were interesting and they were fun. Some of them were a little more challenging, but some were fun. I took up leadership roles for selfish reasons. I wanted promotion, and it would look good on the paperwork if I had done some sort of leadership role. I've done leadership roles for pragmatic reasons. well, I can do a damn sight better job than they're going to do. And I've done it for altruistic reasons. I felt it was my time to give back. I'd had a great time, and it was now my time to give it back. Those were my reasons for taking up leadership roles, and I think it's quite interesting to look at yourself and see what reasons that you have taken up leadership roles for. So finally, what are the barriers, as I see it, to diverse leadership? And many people have covered what I've already said. I think there is a lack of role models and of positive role models. I think there's a huge lack of supportive networks. And I think that's something that we can do in this room, is to help set up networks. Networks on the whole tend to be set up because you're like somebody. But if there's nobody else like you in your institution, then we're going to have to build some sort of network somewhere else for you. There's a lack of support. I think people do need to feel supported. I've been very fortunate. I've felt supported all through my academic life, but people do need support. Middle management, I see, is a problem. I think senior people at universities or industry get why you've got to have a diverse set of people, a diverse leadership. I think they get that absolutely. But I think middle management, the ones that are in between, if you want, where you are trying to do a leadership role, and at the very senior ones, the ones in the middle there, can act as a block. Because actually, they're so busy, they're just wanting to get the job done, they don't bother about it, and they don't get what diverse leadership is all about. So I think we need to work on middle management. Flexible working is another thing that we need to address. Why can't we all work flexibly? Critical mass is an interesting one. When I first started talking about women in senior roles and in STEM, I was told, well, if you can get it to a critical mass, i.e. if you can get between 20 and 30% of women, for example, in your institution, then you're sorted. And I observed that to be true. I think that is true. The problem is now that we talk about diversity as a whole and we look at much more inclusion and much more diverse set of people, we can't do that 20% rule anymore. So I tend to invert it and say, as long as you've not got one set of people or one group of people who are in a majority, then we're okay. And I finish by using the word, as Jackie and others have said, on culture. I think this is a long haul, and we've got to get the culture changed, and I hope today will help to do that. Thank you very much.
And Carol?
Good morning. It's a great pleasure to be here. Can I ask for a show of hands? Please put your hand up if you consider yourself to be in academia right now. Okay. And a show of hands if you consider yourself not to be something else. Okay, that's great. We've got a really nice mix. And I'm looking at this wonderful, diverse audience. And the first thing I want you to think about today is the energy, the inspiration, and the positivity, and the practical steps that you'll hear, and you have already heard in the inspiring talks up until now. This is a wonderful feeling today. But what's the environment that you're going back to? How do you take the energy and the inspiration that you hear today and take that back and do something in your organisation and not have to wait another year to come back to the Royal Society? My background has been in academia. I was very fortunate through my career that I've had some lucky breaks. I had no plan for my career. I actually went for an interview at Jodrell Bank Observatory at the University of Manchester when I was an undergraduate, and the illustrious panel of mostly bearded white male professors, the only diversity being whether or not they had a beard, all very nice gentlemen, said to me, so why, tell us why you want to come to Jodrell Bank, which of course was a very illustrious place and still is, to do a PhD. And I said, I don't. Because they'd actually got my paperwork mixed up. I'd applied for a one-year master's because I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I had a job offer in industry. I was thinking about where my physics degree should take me. And at that point, they then had a bit of a discussion and they argued with me and they told me that, in fact, I had applied to do a PhD, which is also a take-home message. Don't tell women what they already know. That is wrong. So I gently, politely explained that I hadn't because I'd only really thought about what I wanted to do in the coming year. And they persuaded me to stay for the day and actually spend the day at Jodrell Bank. My original degree was very theoretical. Jodrell Bank was full of electronics and technology, and all of a sudden there was diversity. There was something different in my experience. And it was very, very exciting. And so they said, well, why don't you take a few days to think about it and call us back and see what you want to do. So I went away and I was incredibly thrilled by the opportunity. And I didn't call them back. And again, this is another take-home message. When you're thinking about diversity at any level, you have to work really hard. Diversity won't happen by itself. You will not find the best people stepping forward. You have to go find them. And you have to work and really say, it's you we want. And a few weeks passed, and the admissions tutor phoned me up and said, we haven't heard from you. What are your thoughts? And my thoughts at that point were imposter syndrome. I'm probably not going to get a very good degree. I have a job offer in a company which I'm very excited about for a 2-2. And to do a PhD, I need a 2-1. And I was just scared I probably would be lucky to get a 3rd. And again, all of a sudden, you have that academic hierarchy. And this very insightful academic said to me, well, we have a master's place, so don't make this a grade choice, make this a life choice. If you want to come to do a PhD, you can come, and if you get a 2-2, we'll take you on the master's for a year, and then you can transfer to do a PhD. And if you get a 2-1 or above, great, you can come straight in, but make it a life choice. I phoned the company up, and they said, wow, how exciting. Imagine the thought of having 3 years off to do a PhD. So you see, you laugh. But again, I want you also to realise what a privilege it is to be in academia. We'll put you on the graduate training course after. We can't pay you extra, of course, but it was already a huge amount of money compared to what I had, because it won't be subject specific, but it'll be great. It'll broaden your mind. So I went into my PhD with a real sense of open horizons and potential and no fixed plan. Not, I want to become a professor, I want to become an astrophysicist. I was doing something exciting and interesting. And I think the lesson from that really is that if you put together diverse teams of rich talent because you have a clearly articulated goal that you want to address, you will actually find diversity much easier to design. If your goal is to win a prize or get a grant or get a promotion, your path is going to be much harder, your teams will be less effective, and life's just going to be tough, and you won't achieve anything particularly useful or important. Whereas if you have a really important question or problem to solve, you will then naturally bring together the most diverse teams because you will sensibly want that breadth of thought in order to help you achieve those goals. You will also have people who will step forward into those roles because they will understand what the goal is and they'll know how they can bring their talents to it. I had a number of experiences through my career like that, and again this is the cautionary tale of just search harder. I think the comment I heard from an eminent woman scientist was, for every man you think about inviting to give a seminar, go look for the even better woman, and you can put in whatever diverse pot you're looking at there. And I think it is about looking beyond who we are. If you look at your teams and they all look like you, and they all think like you, and they all behave like you, then why did you bother? Because you're there. You didn't need clones. You've got a problem if your teams all look the same as you. And I think this becomes very, very important when we're talking about organisational leadership versus science leadership. I was also very fortunate that I won a Royal Society University Research Fellowship. That really gave me the power, the capacity and the independence to build an independent science team and to learn how to do that. I also worked in the United States, and I agree very much with what Jackie said and a colleague at the back about the difference in the cultures. There was a very different energy doing science in the United States, which I brought back to the UK. So I have built and led scientific teams, and as I say, because we were goal-driven, I was able to get a diversity of thought, working with engineers and theorists and observers and experimentalists to really address some of those goals. Sometimes when we went from a standing start and had no reputation in a field. What I find very different, though, is organisational leadership, and this is where academia, I think, is significantly behind other sectors. I personally believe that you have to have diversity by design. I agree with Leslie that we can sit and wait for the next 50 to 100 years. It isn't naturally going to happen. Another comment that struck me when I once heard it was unconscious bias. So if you've been through your unconscious bias and you're still biased, it's called conscious bias if you've been through the training. So the problem is organisations that do lots of work on bias and diversity and, they all get terribly well trained. There's literature that in the social sciences that shows that organisations that think they're less biased actually turn out to be more biased than the organisations that haven't thought about it at all. And so I think I like very much Jackie's idea of positive intent. I guess the way I thought about it as a cynical academic is I usually attribute to stupidity before I attribute to malice. But it's the same thing, it's positive intent. So I think we can look at our structures, and we have incredibly ingrained power structures already embedded in our organisations, and they are incredibly hard to move. And it may manifest itself through busy middle management who have a lack of attention to detail due to lack of time. It may be willfully certain sections thinking, well, I'm just going to keep the power here. And a colleague said to me recently, the real problem, of course, is that it will take sacrifice. The men are going to have to give up the power they don't want to let go of. Hands up if you're a man who has power. They all, yeah, hands up, hands up. Hands down if you don't want to give it up. No, I'm not going to embarrass you. And the way I look at it, now I've taken on a new role as Chief Scientific Advisor for the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and this has moved me out of my academic comfort zone, which is really important. And what I see there is real mission delivery. And the FCO, and as you heard from Jackie, the whole of the civil service is working very hard and very explicitly on diversity. And of course, this is self-interest. Diversity makes you better at what you do, and it's really important we are the best at what we can do. So I think in academia, we believe we have a meritocracy. We believe excellence naturally comes to the fore. But of course, if you then look at how you deliver on a goal with a team of people who are all the same, then you actually have to naturally conclude that you'll deliver mediocrity. And that's not what we should be doing in academia. And what I've seen just from my first few weeks at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, first of all, is more women, which is nice. More senior women, incredible role models. There's lots of work, and it comes from the very top. Both men and women are working very hard, both in terms of the intent, but also the structures and the mechanisms and the resources that go into that, and lots of energy. But of course, when you are mission critical and you are required to deliver on goals, and most importantly, you are held to account on how you deliver on those goals, all of a sudden, power becomes responsibility, and it becomes really scary. So if you're, let's take the example of male privilege. If you're the guy in the room who I'm coming to and saying you're responsible for these people's lives, now maybe you want to have a diverse team. Now maybe you're feeling a bit nervous in your role. It's not about status, as Tom says. It's about real life. People are going to blame you when, frankly, the proverbial hits the fan. Then all of a sudden, that power doesn't feel like something you want to hold on to. It's responsibility that you want to share. And that then translates into a need for capability. And I think that's the kind of mindset that we have to get into. What is the capability that we need in order to deliver the best that we possibly can? And I think within academia, it's really important that we think in that context, because we actually have to give our people the space and the time to be creative, because ultimately that goes back to the heart of what we do in research. So without the diverse leadership, we get groupthink. We don't do the best research. We also then end up stuck in the power structures and the mechanisms of those power structures. The other thing that strikes me about academia is how long we all spend on committees. Hands up if you're on a committee. Hands up if you're on more than one committee. Put your hands up if you would be on those committees if I took £1 per minute from your salary for the time you sit on those committees. Yeah, okay, it was a few. So there are the committees where we think we understand what we're doing. And again, senior colleagues said to me, when you're thinking about setting your goals and as you become more senior, and obviously minorities have this weight on their shoulders, you become more illustrious, you get many calls to sit on committees. You'll be the go-to token person to have on that committee if we think about diversity only at the surface level. And so you're more likely to get minorities saying no to invitations because they're overburdened. So again, you need to think differently. You might think about having smaller committees. Famously, Steve Jobs, Apple, $100 billion turnover company, had no committees. He described it as he had lots of talent-rich teams who knew how to deliver with the autonomy that they had, and he spent his day going around speaking to teams and arguing and challenging and doing better. So that's one way to think about it. I think in terms of committees, the question is, what is the goal of the committee? What are they going to deliver? To whom are they delivering it? Does the person or persons to whom they're delivering it know they're getting it, and do they want it? And I think that's your bottom line. And I think within academia in particular, it's important that we have very robust organisational structures and we have governance structures, but actually think a bit more about what that committee's for. Finally, I'd like to say something a little bit about awards. It's certainly true that if your goal in life is to win an award, you're going to be driven by the wrong things. And I think that awards can become part of the game of the system, and I think that that's a problem. But I also think that they can be a game changer, particularly for people who have done the work that they've done, whether that's in diversity, whether that's in scientific research, whether that's in whatever the award is coming for. When they've done that because it's the right thing to do and they've been driven by other motivations, to then have their community say, we see you, we recognise you, and we value you, and we do that publicly. I think that's what the value of awards is. And we'll see one of those this afternoon for the Athena Award. So I think hopefully you have some take-home messages to take home from today. And I think the biggest one is do challenge the status quo. I've learned most from my junior colleagues. I did give a talk at a women's network, and I said, don't be afraid to go up to somebody senior and ask them to be your mentor. Yes, they're incredibly busy. Yes, they're very senior. Yes, they may look really scary, but just ask them and they might say yes. And in fact, it's my young mentees who've approached me and asked me to mentor them, not in my field of research, who I've learnt the most from. And just to finish from my FCO perspective, the one thing that has humbled and struck me in the last few weeks that I've been in the role is how very privileged we are to be able to do the work that we do in a safe environment where we don't fear for our lives, we don't fear for our physical safety, we aren't in war zones. And overall, if we do manage to lead by example and have that diversity, ultimately it's the women and the children who suffer disproportionately in the most extreme environments, and they are the ones who are most likely, when they are brought into the dialogue, to help us to change issues around war and conflict and extremism. Thank you.
Okay, now this is where we open it to the floor and you can ask questions. We have roving mics. Okay. There's one along the back wall. Is the mic going over there? Back. There's a hand back there along the back wall. Sorry.
Hi, Lily Hunt from Edis/Wellcome. Just on that quick point about awards, one of the things that I'm curious about is thoughts of how to sort of change this idea of doing science or doing research as a result of getting rewards. I remember back when I was a kid and I first started talking about becoming a scientist, and even the adults around me were talking about, oh, you could be famous for discovering a cure for cancer, or you could win a Nobel Prize, and that's still a motivation even down at that age. So how do we expect to change that at a leadership level?
Is that me? Okay. So I think in reality we can't in any short time. I think really I'd quite like to just have a bonfire of all the awards, but I don't think that that's a practical reality today. And so then I think we have to do, which is precisely what I said, is think about the criteria that we use to decide who receives awards. And we need those criteria to reflect what we want and what we want as a scientific community. And as I say, you ask people and they always give the same answers for what they want out of their leaders, but no mainstream award that I know that isn't an award specifically for diversity and inclusion includes it in any of the criteria. So if you so imagine, the award that I had from the Royal from the Royal Society of Chemistry is the Chris Ringold Award for Physical Organic Chemistry, so how good I am at measuring the rates of reactions. But if in the criteria for that award, the proposer had to make a statement about how I had supported a diverse range of physical organic chemists into their careers, as part of that, then we would have got, one, a reflection of a behaviour that we would think was good, but then the me's of the world would learn, oh, hang on, if I want these accolades, if I want to be seen as being a world-leading physical organic chemist, I have to start behaving differently and not be one of those people who receives award in spite of, or even because of the fact that there is this wake of destroyed careers, disillusioned students, people whose dreams have been crushed, but it got me to the front. And if we can change that, if it's part of the criteria, we will change the behaviours of people. And that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think part of the problem we have, particularly in academia, is that hierarchy of approval. And I think it's, broadening out Tom's idea of status, it's approval. All the way up, we're seeking approval. It's quite infantilizing, actually. How do you judge your own worth? And then how do you survive in that system? And of course, whether it's a prize, whether it's a grant. I mean, one of the stark statistics that I came across at the Institute of Physics, my role as sort of head of the steering committee for heads of departments in physics, was that there were no women awarded mid-size, sort of the few £1 million awards, grants from EPSRC this year. There were none awarded because none applied. And again, you then start to say, what's the structural bias there? So grants are the things that, again, get you the approval. It also helps you to build your group. It gets you the promotions. It buys you out of teaching. It's all of those structural things. A prize, an award from, say, the Royal Society, may help you win one of those grants, or vice versa. And it's all cooked into the system. I think that then leads to that very aberrant behaviour you start to see. So, for example, the Me Too campaign. Well, yes, he may have, allegedly sexually harassed 25 young women, but he did bring in $10 billion of funding and won all these medals. So I think it's the wrong way round. We're not here for the awards. We're publicly funded, we're publicly accountable. We should be doing important things, and again, it's a privilege of the position of being in academia. If you win one of those awards, and there are a few, but I note that they're often awarded to women, they come with the responsibility of paying it forward. So you go to an awards ceremony and you meet all these other amazing women who are nominated for these prizes, and then you are expected to network and support other women. Well, let's not just have the women do that work. Let's actually, as Tom says, have that embedded in the culture of those awards.
Can I just say, I think there's one thing that women can do. If you look at prizes, particularly the ones I know best, the Royal Society of Chemistry, that if women get nominated, then they have the percentage that are nominated then see it through. They get it through. However, the number of women who nominate other women or other men is very much less. Why do we not nominate people? So I think there is an onus on us to go and see, why aren't we nominating more people? Because we live in a world where prizes and awards are important, and like Tom, I don't think that's going to disappear anytime soon. So let's make sure we get our fair share of them as well. So nominate. And you don't have to be certain seniority to nominate. Nominate.
Is there one in the middle?
Thank you. I think one of the major challenges for being a leader and a person with disabilities is the time management, the overload of hours that you are expected to do to succeed in the current climate of scientific world. And it's damning, the percentages. 16% of the population of working age have a disability, yet only 4% declare that in HEIs. And in STEM research, it's just 2%. Notably, 14% or thereabouts in anonymous surveys will declare a disability. We have a massive, massive cultural change that's required to state that I am not a problem because I use wheels to get around, that I am not a deficit because I have to work differently.
There were a couple of people right in the same area. Yeah.
Could I just comment on that? Thank you for that comment. I think the really important thing around disability is that and obviously, you know, there's hidden disability as well, that an environment that is good for any minority would pick a particular characteristic. When you design to that, everybody else benefits disproportionately. So this idea of that it should be a tag-on or a reasonable adjustment for that minority person, you know, I think that's absolutely central.
Sure.
I'm the Access Ambassador to the University of East Anglia, a self-styled title, I have to say. But we have massively increased the accessibility of our campus in the last 5 years, and by doing so, have massively improved the environment generally for all students and staff. And we are one of the top-ranking universities for students with disabilities and things like this. We intend to get better. There is a huge way to go, though. The unconscious bias of the architects is rather large, and I'm about to educate a new set of architects who have been acquired to build a new building but have already told one committee that, we can't manage to do it for everybody. And they will be informed that actually at our university it's policy that universal design is built into our buildings. We won't get it all the way right all of the time, but we're damn well trying.
So well done you, and thank you very much. And I think it's important you share that good practice, because I think that's the way we can speed it up and we can get it more into the culture and get it happening everywhere. So please. I have a design guide. I'm very happy. Good. Well, important that you do so.
So can I also add, so I have a plea to the people that do the surveys, and there were two that I did this week. And for those of you that might have noticed the limp, I do have a mobility disability. And indeed, the survey that asked me, do you have a disability? I replied, yes. The survey that asked me, are you disabled? No, I'm bloody not. And we have to get past this mindset that having a disability does not mean, as you said, I am a problem. It means that, you know what, there is something that I have to do which I do slightly differently to the way you do it.
Thank you. It's Jan Peters from Catalytic. And several people have mentioned the challenge of middle management and bullying and harassment. No one's specifically called out microaggressions, those insignificant daily behaviours and practices that build up and make people feel that they can't contribute. I wondered whether the panel could comment on times when they had wished they'd called out some behaviours and been an active bystander, or practices that they have come across that they could recommend or commend to other people to challenge behaviours.
I think the active bystander training is incredibly important. I have dealt with it in various different capacities, sexual harassment within academia and misconduct. I recognise implicitly, and I'm sure many of the people in the room here do, the importance or the impact of microaggressions in setting the tone of the culture that enables worse behaviour beyond that. And that's true whether it's research integrity or other kinds of issues. I recently went through a course on bringing in the bystander training as head of department, and it was incredibly powerful. And I've now brought that into my department for all staff across all grades and all job families. So it's not about taking academics and putting them in a room, putting technicians in a different, but having everybody together. And the trainers, it's actually the University of New Hampshire's model that we've used. What really struck me was that when we talk about things like bullying and harassment based on gender, it can be very polarising. And particularly, you know, in a male-dominated department, the men all think that they're the baddies and the women are all the victims, and neither of those demographics work very well. We're all bystanders, and when you go through that training, not only does it really give you a different perspective on the people who will be suffering at the ends of those microaggressions, but it empowers you to figure out practically what to do. And it was literally the day after I had been on that course. I was in a cafe with my family and watched a young woman mercilessly harassed by one of her male colleagues. And it was at that point where immediately the diagram and the training came into my mind. Instead of sitting thinking, what do I do here? I started to have a practical tool. So I think that's a really effective way to move forward. We're going through the shock and awe and the salacious details of extreme cases. And I think that it's really important to understand what is happening, but we actually have to keep that moving forward and really, really change things, in my opinion.
I think it's up to the leaders as well, that they will not stand for any nonsense, and I call a lot of it nonsense. Not to trivialise it, but just because I think that's what it is. And I think as long as everybody understands the leader's position and that they will have the backing of that leader, and I think it's very important that they know they will have the backing of the leader, then I think I think we can move it forward.
Given the limitations of time, you may not have a chance to get everyone's question. Okay.
I'm just talking about the barriers to diverse leadership. What are your thoughts regarding transparency and consistency? Because that is something which I see it's very difficult to know what criteria sometimes is used for this selection. And then you can see that the inconsistency is coming into play again.
Very important, I think. You've got to be transparent and you've got to be consistent.
And again, I think it goes to actively seeking people. Because as you were saying, Leslie, about promotion, sometimes people, even if the criteria are transparent, we see this with the gender side, the more detailed we try to make the criteria, women on average will not apply for something until they can do 90% of the list. Men on average will take a punt at 30%. The longer the list, the more you discriminate against women. And actually, if you then go, if maybe there's some job role, I don't know, let's say vice chancellors. Do you want to be a vice chancellor? If you go and look up all the photos of all the vice chancellors and they're all white men, and there's a really open, transparent advert that's saying, come apply to be a vice chancellor, chances are you won't, because you'll look at that group and say, they don't really mean it. The word in the advert, do they really mean that? And so that's where I think, again, that proactive seeking people out and having people use their networks to reach more deeply into diverse areas where you're not represented.
My name is Mariah Fitzgerald. I'm a neuroscientist at UCL and a fellow of the Royal Society. I'd like to get back to the leadership in a research environment. It's been raised by a number of the people in the audience that, you know, we're under enormous pressure as an academic, whatever your background, to produce good science, to teach, to manage, to mentor, all of these things. And when you're at a younger age, whatever your background, this is quite frightening to take on a leadership role as well. And one of the problems is the dire financial situation of universities that are unable to give people the support they need when they take on a leadership role. So at UCL, if you agree to chair a large and responsible committee, you will get no support writing the minutes. You'll write them yourself. You'll get no support for booking rooms, emailing people. You'll do all that yourself. You'll write a report and someone might thank you, but you will get no extra money or no extra time or support to do these jobs. So it's not surprising that people from, if you like, less confident backgrounds, because that's how I see the diversity problem, is lack of confidence. It's not surprising that they don't step forward. In fact, it's surprising that anybody does. So I would like to challenge the Royal Society, of which I am a fellow, and say, which is kind of along the lines that you were saying about prizes going for other things, that why don't we have a grant system? I mean, there is already you can have an upgrade in your salary through the Royal Society if you perform well in your science. Why don't we have a system that provides specific support for young and I hope diverse sector of scientists who are interested in taking such a leadership role, but simply cannot afford either the time or the effort and would get some actual financial support from the Royal Society. So I lay down the gauntlet to the Society to think about that.
I apologize to the people who have their hands up, but we've already gone over our 5-minute warning. So can we just go through the panel and 1 or 2 sentences as a take-home message? Tom.
Actually, almost everybody in this room, regardless of where you see yourself in the structures in which you work, you are already a leader. You are already a role model. You already have agency. Use it.
I don't know how to follow that necessarily. That's quite inspiring. I think it's just, I wanted to say how much of a privilege it feels like to be in a room with everybody else who has the same sort of awareness and has the same sort of motivation that I'm coming from. And I just want you to keep bearing that torch and keep the momentum going. Thank you.
So thank you for listening. I think the most important part of this is going to happen now with the workshops, and we're going to come up with some actions, because I think, you know, we can talk all we want, but unless we can come up with a few actions, then I would count this day wasted. So give me some actions.
Okay, finally, Carol.
I'm really looking forward to speaking to many of you. I think the most important thing in this room, stay connected. Share your business cards, make contact with one another. And before you leave today, ask one another, what do you work on? Because they're the networks around the research and the work that you do that will actually give you the motivation to keep pushing on the diversity.
Okay. Thank you again to all the panel.